Beloved, today I want to talk about a principle so vital it can shape your life, your future, and the destiny of your community. I want you to write down two words, game and chance. Write them down because understanding these two words can change how you think about life, how you make decisions, and how you protect yourself from unnecessary consequences. Life is not a game. I repeat, life is not a game. Your life is a serious matter. It is precious, it is sacred, and it is a responsibility you must never play with. Let me begin with a fundamental truth. Laws are not created to accommodate vices. They are created to stop them. Vices always exist before the law, long before the law is even written. The 10 Commandments were not given until thousands of years after man sinned. That means law is not primarily about preventing sin, but about defining right from wrong. It awakens conscience. Without law, conscience is blind. Romans tells us, when the law arrived, sin came alive. You do not know wrong until right is defined. God gave the Israelites commandments like, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not worship other gods, not to invent rules, but to address realities already taking place. So laws are never meant to dignify sin, to sanctify vice, or to normalize wrongdoing. They exist to protect the individual and the society by defining boundaries and consequences. This is why when a law is created, it must be studied deeply, not merely voted on impulsively. Take Colorado last week. They legalized marijuana for medicinal purposes. People celebrated, but immediately they were left asking, how will we regulate this? How do we enforce it? How do we manage the consequences? You cannot make a decision before understanding the consequences. That is reckless, it is irresponsible, it is a gamble with life itself. Let me be clear, marijuana, like many things God created, is good in itself. Genesis tells us God saw all that He made and it was good. Everything He created has a use. But when use turns into abuse, when a tool becomes a trap, that is where the danger begins. Abnormal use destroys, and this is why wisdom, discernment, and foresight are vital before any choice. The law, the structure, the boundaries, they are there to guide, to protect, to define consequences so that use does not become abuse. This brings me to my second principle. Consequences are more important than decisions. Write that down. Keep it in your heart. Do not make a decision more important than understanding its consequences. Decisions are moments in time, fleeting, but consequences last a lifetime. Decisions without study, without foresight, without research, without understanding the historical data or the lessons of those who have gone before you are like setting a fire without knowing the wind. Before you decide, exhaust all knowledge. Study every outcome. Learn from history. Learn from the lives of others. Check their successes. Check their failures. Do not be naive. It is irresponsible to ask someone to decide without equipping them with knowledge about the consequences. True leadership does not transfer the burden of decision to those who are unprepared. A leader must take responsibility. Adam never handed the fruit to anyone, yet God held him accountable. Leadership is about foresight, responsibility, and accountability. Beloved, in all decisions, personal, professional, or societal, understand this. Chance is a game for the wealthy, but a source of hope for the poor. The wealthy can afford to gamble. If they lose, their lives continue. The poor often gamble out of necessity, out of hope for survival. And here lies the danger. When life itself depends on chance, when survival is tied to luck rather than planning, wisdom, or preparation, then chance becomes a master, not a tool. It becomes destructive. There is nothing wrong with games, with entertainment, with calculated risk. But the moment your life depends on chance, you enter a path of destruction. You must distinguish between playing a game and relying on chance for survival. One is harmless, the other is fatal. Beloved, today I want to talk about a principle so vital it can shape your life, your future, and the destiny of your community. I want you to write down two words, game and chance. Write them down because understanding these two words can change how you think about life, how you make decisions, and how you protect yourself from unnecessary consequences. Life is not a game. I repeat, life is not a game. Your life is a serious matter. It is precious, it is sacred, and it is a responsibility you must never play with. Let me begin with a fundamental truth. Laws are not created to accommodate vices. They are created to stop them. Vices always exist before the law, long before the law is even written. The 10 Commandments were not given until thousands of years after man sinned. That means law is not primarily about preventing sin, but about defining right from wrong. It awakens conscience. Without law, conscience is blind. Romans tells us, when the law arrived, sin came alive. You do not know wrong until right is defined. God gave the Israelites commandments like, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not worship other gods, not to invent rules, but to address realities already taking place. So laws are never meant to dignify sin, to sanctify vice, or to normalize wrongdoing. They exist to protect the individual and the society by defining boundaries and consequences. This is why, when a law is created, it must be studied deeply, not merely voted on impulsively. Take Colorado last week. They legalized marijuana for medicinal purposes. People celebrated, but immediately they were left asking, how will we regulate this? How do we enforce it? How do we manage the consequences? You cannot make a decision before understanding the consequences. That is reckless. It is irresponsible. It is a gamble with life itself. Marijuana, like many things God created, is good in itself. Genesis tells us God saw all that He made and it was good. Everything He created has a use. But when use turns into abuse, when a tool becomes a trap, that is where the danger begins. Abnormal use destroys. And this is why wisdom, discernment, and foresight are vital before any choice. The law, the structure, the boundaries, they are there to guide, to protect, to define consequences so that use does not become abuse. This brings me to my second principle. Consequences are more important than decisions. Write that down. Keep it in your heart. Do not make a decision more important than understanding its consequences. Decisions are moments in time, fleeting, but consequences last a lifetime. Decisions without study, without foresight, without research, without understanding the historical data or the lessons of those who have gone before you are like setting a fire without knowing the wind. Before you decide, exhaust all knowledge, study every outcome, learn from history, learn from the lives of others, check their successes, check their failures. Do not be naive. It is irresponsible to ask someone to decide without equipping them with knowledge about the consequences. True leadership does not transfer the burden of decision to those who are unprepared. A leader must take responsibility. Adam never handed the fruit to anyone, yet God held him accountable. Leadership is about foresight, responsibility, and accountability. Beloved, in all decisions, personal, professional, or societal, understand this. Chance is a game for the wealthy, but a source of hope for the poor. The wealthy can afford to gamble. If they lose, their lives continue. The poor often gamble out of necessity, out of hope for survival. And here lies the danger. When life itself depends on chance, when survival is tied to luck rather than planning, wisdom, or preparation, then chance becomes a master, not a tool. It becomes destructive. And there is nothing wrong with games, with entertainment, with calculated risk. But the moment your life depends on chance, you enter a path of destruction. You must distinguish between playing a game and relying on chance for survival. One is harmless, the other is fatal. Beloved, Principle 8. All laws produce culture. I want you to write this down. Every law created, every rule instituted, every policy enacted will eventually shape the culture of a nation. Culture does not come from money, power, or wealth. Culture comes from principles, from laws, from the standards we set. If the law accepts vice, the culture becomes permissive. If the law upholds integrity, the culture reflects responsibility. Let us take a clear example. When God prepared the nation of Israel, the first thing He gave them was law. Not wealth, not power, not territory, but law. Why? Because law defines normalcy. Law tells a people what is acceptable, what is righteous, and what is forbidden. Norms shape behavior. Principles shape character. And culture grows out of that foundation. Look at the world today. Some nations have decriminalized vices such as prostitution or legalized substances like marijuana. And what happens? When you normalize behavior through law, you shape the culture of an entire generation. In Amsterdam, for instance, prostitution is legal, marijuana is sold openly, and children are exposed to adult lifestyles far too early. What culture does this create? What values are being instilled in young minds? Children who have no ability yet to discern right from wrong are taught by law that certain behaviors are acceptable without consequences. Beloved, do not misunderstand me. I am not condemning individuals. I am pointing to principle. Every law has consequences. Every law shapes behavior. Every law determines the future of a people. And when laws fail to teach accountability, morality, and wisdom, culture suffers. When laws fail to consider consequences, generations are harmed. Now, I want to bring this closer to home. Look at Colorado, where marijuana has been legalized. People voted first, studied later. They made a decision without fully understanding the consequences. And what happens when society acts before wisdom? Chaos, unpreparedness, and the state scrambles to manage the results. Laws without foresight create societal strain. Decisions without studying consequences create disruption. This is why wisdom must precede action. Beloved, you must see the principle. Every action, every law, every decision affects more than the individual. It affects society, culture, and future generations. Do not think that personal choice is isolated. No, what you accept, what you normalize, what you make legal shapes the hearts and minds of your children and grandchildren. Law is teaching and culture is learning. The question is, what are you teaching? What culture are you creating? Now, principle 9, vote your conscience. Always. Always vote with your conscience, not with a group, not with popularity, not with fear of judgment. Your conscience is your internal guide. It is given by God. It is the Holy Spirit within you. You may ignore it, you may rationalize against it, but it never leaves you. Your conscience carries truth, wisdom, and eternal guidance. When you vote, when you decide, when you act, do not follow the crowd. Follow the conscience God placed in you. And principle 10, do not move until you know the effects. I want you to write this down. Do not act until you fully understand the impact of your decisions. The world often moves fast. People rush, they act, they vote, they decide without considering consequences. But wisdom says, pause, study, understand, learn, look at history, examine outcomes, seek counsel, and then act. Do not be impulsive. Do not be careless. Beloved, the United States Health Department has a principle we should all learn from. When they release a product, they do not only advertise benefits, they list the risks, side effects, consequences. They inform the people. Why? Because responsibility comes with knowledge. If you act without knowing the effects, you are irresponsible, not only to yourself, but to everyone affected by your action. Beloved, we must apply this principle in every aspect of life. Education, governance, relationships, finances, even leisure activities, they all have consequences. If you do not study, if you do not understand, if you do not anticipate, you are setting yourself up for unnecessary failure and harm. Knowledge precedes responsibility. Wisdom precedes action. Consequences follow decision. Beloved, now let's talk about games and chance. I want you to write this down again. Game and chance. Life is not a game. Did you hear me? Life is not a game. Your life is serious, sacred, and eternal. You do not play with it. Yet so many people approach life as if it were a game of luck, a game of chance, a game of risk. And this is where we must pause and reflect. First, let me make something very clear. Chance is a game for the wealthy, but it is a source of hope for the poor. Write that down. The wealthy can afford to risk. They can play, they can gamble, they can lose, and it does not destroy them. But for the poor, chance is survival. Chance becomes life itself. And when survival depends on luck, the risk is catastrophic. One wrong move, one gamble, one failure, and the consequences are devastating. Beloved, this principle is critical. There is a thin line between entertainment and habit. When does a game stop being a game and start being a habit? It happens when you misappropriate funds, when you take resources meant for your family, your responsibilities, your calling, and you gamble them. You see, a game is harmless only when it does not endanger life, relationships, or integrity. Let me give you a vivid example. If a person with billions goes to a casino, a loss of $1 million is entertainment. They still have hundreds of millions left. But if a man with a modest income, 5 mouths to feed and bills to pay goes to that same casino, the loss is destruction. It is not entertainment, it is self-destruction. And this is where so many communities fail. They fail to distinguish between games for entertainment and gambling for survival. Beloved, as leaders, as parents, as those responsible for guiding others, we must recognize this principle. If we allow games to become survival strategies for the vulnerable, we create dependency, poverty, despair, and ultimately destruction. We cannot allow policies, laws, or societal norms to blind us to consequences. We must foresee the effects. Now let us discuss personal sin versus national sin. Beloved, personal sin and transgression are not national sin. You see, God judges humans based on the level of their vice. Personal sin is private. God deals with it privately. But when private sin is promoted to public acceptance, when community sin becomes national policy, now judgment shifts. Now the nation bears the consequence. Now society is held accountable. And history shows us that nations that normalize destructive behavior face collapse, decay, and divine judgment. Beloved, principle 7. Principles are more important than prosperity. Do not be swayed by money, by gain, by wealth, by profit if it comes at the expense of integrity, morality, or wisdom. It is not about how much money you can make. It is about the principle you uphold in making that money. Wealth gained through destruction, through exploitation, through vice is temporary and harmful. Prosperity without principle is a curse, not a blessing. And principle 8. All laws produce culture. Every law you make, every policy you enact shapes behavior, instills norms, and creates the culture of your nation. If a law affirms vice, the culture is corrupted. If a law upholds righteousness, the culture flourishes. This is why God gave Israel the law first, so that their culture would be defined by principle, morality, and wisdom. Laws are not arbitrary. They are the framework for society, for community, and for the future. Beloved, this brings us to principle 9. Vote with your conscience. Always. Not with popularity, not with peer pressure, not with emotion, not with desire, but with conscience. Your conscience is your compass, your internal guidance given by God. You cannot live with the decisions of the crowd. You live with your conscience every day, every choice, every action. Finally, principle 10, do not move until you know the effects. Do not act, do not vote, do not decide until you have studied the consequences. Knowledge precedes responsibility. Consequences follow decision. Wisdom precedes action. This is a universal principle applicable to law, governance, personal behavior, finances, relationships, every sphere of life. Beloved, understand this. Life is serious. Games are for leisure. Chance is for hope, not survival. Consequences are eternal. Laws shape culture. Principles outweigh prosperity. Conscience guides action, and knowledge safeguards responsibility. This is how we lead wisely, live purposefully, and build a society that honors God. Beloved, now we must go deeper. We talked about games, chance, and consequences, but let us focus on the distinction between a game and a habit. A game remains harmless only when it is controlled, limited, and does not interfere with responsibilities, purpose, or integrity. When a game becomes a habit, it crosses a dangerous line. It no longer entertains, it enslaves. Notice this carefully. When a person begins misappropriating funds to continue a game or sacrifices family, education, or vocation for momentary pleasure, the game has become a habit. At that point, it is no longer a choice, it is a chain. It begins to dominate thought, behavior, and priorities. And here is the spiritual principle. Anything that dominates your life outside of God becomes idolatry. Anything that controls your mind, your resources, or your actions above God is no longer a game, it is bondage. Beloved, think about the families destroyed by habits that started as games. Children neglected, finances drained, relationships fractured, futures compromised. And all because what started as entertainment became survival, became obsession, became addiction. When we fail to distinguish between games and habits, we fail to protect the most important aspects of life: peace, purpose, and personal integrity. Now let us talk about leaders and responsibility. A leader who shifts the burden of decisions onto followers is not leading. They are abdicating responsibility. Leadership is not asking the people to decide what is right or wrong, legal or illegal, moral or immoral, and then blaming them when the consequences arrive. True leadership requires wisdom, courage, and accountability. The leader studies the consequences, weighs the options, seeks counsel, and makes the final decision. The people follow, but the responsibility rests on the leader. Beloved, this principle applies in government, in business, and even in family life. Parents cannot leave moral decisions entirely to children. Society cannot leave lawmaking entirely to public opinion without study. Organizations cannot leave ethical decisions to committees without accountability. True leadership takes responsibility for both the decision and its consequences. Let us return to chance. Chance is a dangerous teacher if misunderstood. The poor often gamble on hope. The wealthy gamble for entertainment. And here is the principle. Hope cannot become reliance on randomness. Life cannot be left to chance because chance is unreliable, unpredictable, and cruel. Beloved, you must understand this deeply. When your survival, your family, your integrity, or your calling depends on chance, you are no longer living. You are surviving in uncertainty, and that is spiritually and morally dangerous. Now consider personal sin versus national sin. Personal transgression is private, judged privately by God. But when a private sin becomes public policy, legalized and normalized, now the nation bears the consequence. History is clear. Nations that institutionalize destructive behavior invite judgment. And beloved, this is not a matter of condemnation of individuals. It is a matter of principle. Principles define societies. Ignoring consequences for short-term comfort or profit leads to collapse, decay, and divine correction. Principle 7 again, principles outweigh prosperity. Money, gain, and wealth are tools. They are not the measure of success. If your prosperity requires compromising morality, exploiting others, or condoning vice, it is not prosperity, it is corruption. No amount of money can justify the loss of integrity. And remember this, Prosperity without principle eventually produces destruction. It does not last. It corrupts, it deceives, it enslaves. Finally, beloved, culture flows from law. Every law, every policy, every regulation shapes behavior, defines norms, and forms the character of a nation. Laws are not neutral. They carry consequences that ripple through generations. If a nation legalizes vice without wisdom, the culture shifts toward destruction. If a nation upholds principle and righteousness, the culture strengthens and flourishes. Leaders must recognize that their decisions are not just for today. They shape the moral and spiritual environment for generations. Beloved, I want you to understand this clearly. Life is serious. Choices matter. Consequences are eternal. Games are temporary, but habits shape destinies. Chance is not a strategy for survival. It is a test of wisdom. Leaders must be accountable, and society must honor principle over profit. This is how nations endure. This is how families thrive. This is how individuals live in peace, purpose, and alignment with God. Beloved, now we turn to application. Principles, consequences, and responsibility are not abstract ideas. They shape your daily life, your family, your community, and your destiny. You cannot separate wisdom from action. Knowledge without practice is worthless. Let us begin with personal decisions. Every choice you make has consequences, whether you see them immediately or years later. Choices in education, career, relationships, finances, and character define the trajectory of your life. Do not make decisions lightly. Study the consequences before acting. Ask yourself, will this choice bring long-term benefit or short-term pleasure? Will it honor God or compromise your integrity? Will it strengthen your future or weaken it? Beloved, the Bible reminds us in Proverbs 4:7, wisdom is the principal thing, therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting get understanding. Notice that wisdom is principal, not secondary. Understanding the consequences of your actions is part of wisdom. You cannot separate knowledge from foresight. Study, research, consult mentors, observe examples of others' successes and failures. Ignorance is not an excuse, it is a choice. Now consider family and children. The principles you uphold in your home will determine the character of the next generation. If you allow games, habits, or vices to dominate your household, you are not teaching responsibility. You are creating dependence, confusion, and vulnerability. Children watch what you do more than what you say. They learn morality, discipline, and purpose through observation. Every action you take sends a message about what is normal, acceptable, and desirable. Beloved, discipline is not punishment, it is direction. Teaching children the difference between games and habits, entertainment and necessity, chance and strategy, is teaching them to navigate life wisely. If children are not taught to evaluate consequences, they will inherit a world of uncertainty and chaos. Your responsibility as a parent, guardian, or mentor is to shape their understanding, not just protect them from immediate harm, but equip them for life. Now let us apply this to finances. Money is a tool, not a master. Decisions about spending, saving, investing, and giving must be guided by principle, not impulse. When you mismanage resources to satisfy momentary desires, you are playing a dangerous game with consequences that extend beyond yourself. Debt, lost opportunity, broken trust, and generational weakness are the hidden costs of irresponsibility. Study the impact of every financial choice before acting. Beloved, consider community and citizenship. Voting, civic engagement, and public advocacy are not games. When you vote, you are shaping culture, morality, and the future of your nation. Voting without understanding consequences is irresponsible. Every law, every policy, every leader you endorse has consequences that ripple through society. Principles matter more than popularity, truth matters more than convenience, and long-term stability matters more than short-term gain. Education is another field where decisions carry weight. What children are taught, what information is emphasized, and what values are promoted will determine the moral compass of a generation. Do not confuse novelty with progress. Do not prioritize entertainment over wisdom. Do not allow convenience to override principle. The foundation you lay today will produce the culture of tomorrow. Beloved, accountability is key. You are responsible for your life, your family, and the community you influence. Avoid blaming chance, circumstance, or other people. Examine decisions carefully, understand consequences, and act with integrity. When mistakes happen, own them, learn from them, and correct course. Responsibility is not optional. It is a mark of maturity and alignment with God's purpose. Finally, remember this: your memory is permanent. Every decision, every habit, every choice leaves a record. Proverbs 10:7 reminds us that the memory of the righteous is a blessing, but the memory of the wicked is a curse. Live so that your decisions produce memories you will be proud to remember. Let your life be a testimony of wisdom, principle, and foresight. Beloved, as we move forward, keep these truths close. Life is serious. Decisions have consequences. Games must remain games. Habits must be controlled. Chance is not survival. Leaders must bear responsibility, and principles outweigh prosperity. These are not suggestions. They are the foundation for a life of peace, purpose, and fulfillment. Beloved, now let us consider the nation. Every law, every policy, every decree shapes culture. Laws are not neutral. They define what is normal, what is acceptable, what is honored. A nation's future is determined not by wealth, not by military power, not by natural resources, but by the principles it upholds. Law creates culture. Culture produces destiny. Think about it. When God established Israel, the first gift He gave them was law. Not gold, not armies, not palaces. Law defines what is right, establishes order, and trains conscience. Where law is absent, conscience sleeps, morality declines, and society drifts. The Hebrew word for law, normas, comes from the idea of what is normal. Law sets the standard, law determines the culture, and culture shapes the future. Beloved, watch carefully what laws are being passed in your nation. If vice is legalized, celebrated, or normalized, you are not just tolerating behavior, you are shaping a culture that will influence generations. Take Colorado, take Amsterdam, take any country that decriminalized or legalized behavior without fully considering consequences. The short-term gain appears attractive, but the long-term effect is decay, addiction, moral confusion, broken families, lost purpose. Principle must always precede prosperity. Money, success, comfort, these are not measures of greatness. Principles are. If a law or practice undermines morality, integrity, or responsibility, prosperity becomes hollow. The nation may appear wealthy, but its foundation is crumbling. Rome fell not to armies, but to immorality. Power without principle invites destruction. History is full of nations that prospered briefly but decayed because principle was sacrificed. Now consider leadership. A nation's leaders carry the responsibility of shaping culture. They cannot transfer that burden to the people. Leaders must act with foresight, wisdom, and courage. If leaders neglect responsibility or seek popularity over principle, the nation suffers. Every law, every policy, every societal shift begins with leadership. A strong leader does not ask the people to bear the consequences of ignorance or vice. A strong leader studies, discerns, and decides for the good of all. Beloved, understand this. Personal sin is judged personally, but national sin is judged nationally. What an individual does in private affects only them, but when private behavior is promoted as acceptable for everyone, the judgment extends to the entire community, the state, and the nation. We see this in history. Sodom and Gomorrah, Rome, empires that appeared strong but were spiritually and morally bankrupt. Principle ignored at the national level leads to collapse. Parents, mentors, citizens, leaders, you all have a role. Every action, every law, every cultural message you support contributes to the environment in which your children grow. Will you build a society of responsibility, wisdom, and virtue, or will you create a culture of shortcuts, indulgence, and irresponsibility? The choice is yours. Beloved, one final truth: consequences are eternal. Decisions today affect not just your life, but the lives of generations to come. The nation you leave behind is a reflection of the principles you uphold now. Laws, education, leadership, morality, they are the seeds of destiny. Sow wisely, uphold truth. Prioritize principle over convenience, character over popularity, and consequence over impulse. As you walk through life, remember, life is not a game. Chance is not survival. Games must remain controlled. Leaders must be responsible. Laws create culture. Personal sin is private. National sin carries collective judgment. These truths are not theoretical. They are practical, observable, and timeless. Apply them daily and you will leave a legacy of wisdom, integrity, and purpose. Beloved, the future of your family, your community, and your nation depends on your choices today. Do not underestimate the power of principle. Do not dismiss the weight of consequence. Do not ignore the responsibility of leadership. Live with foresight, walk in wisdom, and embrace accountability in every area of life. Your decisions today are the foundation of tomorrow.